Good early morning. The Hangout is now live, and I'm here, your host, Kevin Wayne, for Mankind Global Media Network, with former managing editor of A Voice for Men, Dean Esmay, now currently with National Coalition for Men. And tell me, Dean, again, what's your current occupation with them?
Well, actually, what I do, I do social media work for the anti-misandry forums and help out Danny Boy once in a while. I help out National Coalition for Men on various specialty things. I had a formal title for a while, but we decided that was not for the best, simply because I'm too obnoxious. And won't stop.
Okay.
And won't stop. But I'm still a member, and then still do specialty work with them. And I even still occasionally do a little. I still hang out with my homies at A Voice for Men, and
Oh, indeed.
put up links in their hot link section sometimes. And
Okay. Yeah, National Coalition for Men's a good organization. So
I'm very proud of them. Yeah, they're a good organization. They've been around since the 70s. They're a genuine 501c3 nonprofit. Tax deductible donations are possible, and good group does good work.
Anyway, the reason why I invited Dean to this hangout has to do with an archive that I've been putting together on my blog, Mankind Global Media, blogspot.com, which is titled What Have Men and Their Supporters Been Doing to Help Men? And basically just starts out by saying, you hear it all the time, feminists are always saying that MRAs just hate feminism. They don't really want to do anything to really help men. And so I started an archive absolutely and utterly destroying that claim, and have been slowly but surely, as I become aware or get the time, have been contacting different individuals, asking them for information, or just finding them online and posting it myself. And today we are with Dean, and we're going to talk about his time with A Voice for Men regarding 4 different individuals that Voice for Men helped with some legal issues. There was Aaron Joseph Harms, Francis Coyote Shivers, Gordon Smith, and Lieutenant Joel Kirk. And so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to briefly read from each one of these, and I'm going to basically just kind of set the stage by just reading the oldest ABFM article, kind of let you know what this is all about. And then, Dean, I will quote from you based on what you told me so far. And with each one, we'll pause enough to give you a chance to just ramble on as much as you feel like rambling on. So
let me say one thing before you do. I've been involved in all the cases you've mentioned. Also been involved in other cases, some of which I can't talk about.
Right.
Some of them are cases I've been involved in previously in other groups. I'm sorry. These aren't the only 4 examples. Let's
of
put
course.
it that way. They're not even close. Nor is getting innocent men out of jail or trying to the only thing we do. But certainly, look, I'm happy to talk about these if it helps people understand that any of it. Yep.
Getting innocent men out of jail is actually, if that was the only thing you guys did, that would be a big thing. In my book, it would anyways. And so we'll definitely be glad to talk about this. Now, this is from an article titled The Meat Grinder, Edmonton Style, the Aaron Joseph Harms Story, published May 7, 2014 by Suzanne McCarley.
Good old Susie.
Okay, it says Joseph Harms' nightmare began almost 5 years ago and is yet to end. On May 21st, 2011, his 15-year-old common-law stepdaughter, Angel Roberts, called 911 and reported that he raped her. October 9th, 2013, Joseph was acquitted during his trial after Angel confessed in court that it was all a lie. He is still facing very much unrelated, quote-unquote, false charges of assaulting his girlfriend and assaulting police officers who broke down his door without identifying themselves while threatening to kill him during an unjustified and unlawful raid. The consequences of Angel Roberts' false accusation are staggering. Joseph Harms was questioned and arrested, and he has since been subject to nonstop pressure and coercion to confess anything at all. This, of course, is current as of when it was written back in May of 2014. Coercion to confess anything at all which might justify the initial charges and conveniently discredit him as well. He has lost his home, his family, his pets, his job, and everything else he has worked for in life. He was questioned and detained for several days without an attorney. He was denied much needed medical attention. He was denied bail through an act of fraud and then refused release when his bail was finally granted. He was physically and mentally abused while incarcerated, and he was denied contact with those who would help and support him, both while in remand and under the conditions of his bail. Most of his attorneys worked against his best interests, both actively and passively. And you told me when I asked you about Aaron Joseph Harms a couple of weeks ago, you just briefly, you said, we and others worked with and investigated his case, used social media as well as a couple of articles on A Voice for Men to put heavy pressure on the Crown prosecutors and judges to set him free. So feel free to tell us more.
Well, I mean, that's the long and short of the Joe Harms saga. Most of his friends call him Joe, so he goes by his middle name mostly. It does, so it gets confusing because sometimes they'll call him Joseph Harms, sometimes they'll call him Aaron Harms, sometimes they'll call him Aaron Joseph Harms. It's Joe Harms. And at least on the cases that I've worked on A Voice for Men, like I said, I've worked other cases outside of ABFM, work cases going before I even was on ABFM, not as much, but yeah. It's to the best that we can determine everything. I mean, we spent an incredible amount of time going over the documentation, going over everything. Yeah, Joe Harms was tortured by the Canadian police. Sorry, it's what happened. And in my view, it's not an indictment of Canada, although Canada's got some real problems in this issue, worse than many others. What's most interesting about Joseph Harms is that he managed to survive. Now, let's have no question, Joe's had a somewhat troubled past with the legal system. I know, for example, Joe, and he'll own this, had a drinking problem. Now, at the same time, it's instructive because when you see somebody who basically doesn't have all the money in the world, can't afford a good lawyer, is extremely dependent on the system to provide him with some kind of legal assistance or just do it on his own. The system can be very Kafkaesque and very incredibly hard to understand, and people within it generally are terribly, I'm not going to say they're sadistic, but they become hardened and treat people going through there like meat, basically. And it is not surprising a lot of guys stuck in this sort of thing wind up turning to drugs or alcohol. And I'm not calling him a druggie. I'm just saying he started developing a problem. And one of the reasons is because it's like when you're under arrest and when you're under indictment and when you're spending weekends in jail and when you're having people in authority screaming at you and accusing you of things, that is an incredibly difficult thing on your psyche, and it takes a massive toll. You can't hold a job because employers won't hire you unless you get lucky and you find someone who's super sympathetic. You have people running around that assuming, well, you must have done something to deserve all this, so what are you whining about? It's a common thing, men here especially. And it obviously took a toll on him. I don't think, I mean, God love him. I know he's putting his life together, but this man lost years and years and years of a productive life, over phony allegations, and the entire. Let me put it to you this way: the way that story ended is he got an apology from the courts and basically a good luck for the future for your troubles, which is a common thing. I mean. Now, this isn't Canada, but in the U.S., we have the same exact problem. The U.S. Constitution says that people are entitled to a speedy trial by a jury of their peers.
Yeah.
And nobody gets a speedy trial by a jury of their peers anymore. It doesn't happen. The system holds on to people for years and years and years before everything lines up. And if during the time that you're being tormented by the system, you finally lose it and do something that you shouldn't, like, I don't know, go out and get a drunken disorderly charge while you're waiting for something else. It's just always used to bang you as to why you probably deserved whatever you got anyway. A lot of guys in situations like his wind up killing themselves. And let's be clear, he was eventually convicted of some minor shit and otherwise not only declared not guilty, but, apologized to by people involved in the system. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, and I'm glad you did that. Now, how many guys did you kill in the process? How many guys wound up killing themselves on purpose or on accident? Because of this, because of the way the system works.
You mentioned earlier about, it sounded like you touched on public defenders. He had public defenders appointed to him or something because you said he was dependent on the system.
I keep forgetting what they call it in Canada, but they have the same idea. The system will grant, the prosecutors are called the Crown Attorney. I forget what the public defender is called. I don't think it's public defender, but yeah, same thing. You have a right to an attorney, so they give you, basically usually a terrible one who doesn't much care.
That's what I've heard. I have a friend that was in the system, and he was in the mental health ward in Oregon, and he had basically a public defender that had no heart.
Well, what goes on with those government defenders is, well, there's two ways, and I don't know that I know of them. I don't know how it works in Canada, but because I haven't looked at this part of it, I mean, but either you'll be on salary, and in which case it'll be a pretty lousy salary.
Right.
And the lawyers who wind up getting it are usually either not hireable elsewhere, or they're idealists crusading. And there's only so many years of idealist crusading before you turn into a cynic, or they're not really that competent in the first place, and this is the best job they can get. Or what'll be worse is they'll get, and I really do think this is worse, they'll get a standard check from a court of something like, $500 or $1,000 to defend each client they defend. So $500 for you and your drunken disorderly, and another $500 for you and your rape case. And the financial incentive for that defense attorney is chew through as many of these as quickly as possible. They get paid the same either way.
Getting back to Joseph's case, what was there any particular involvement of yours, you personally, that you would like to share or recall?
The Joe Harms case is the one I have the least direct involvement in.
Right.
It was tough on Joe because I remember, he comes in looking for help. Nobody else cares, right? He's documenting his own story on his blog, which again, more guys should do. But, and he got friendly contacts from MRAs, including us, and from these other people. And I know it was extremely disorienting for him, right? I mean, he feels like the world's destroying him. He's not sure whether he even wants to keep living or not, right? Nobody cares about him. I'm pretty sure if he didn't have the woman that's in his life, he probably might have just checked out, so many guys do. And so he was confused, and that'll happen to people, not knowing who to trust. If you're constantly being persecuted by the press and the authorities,
right.
And he was right to be paranoid too, because if somebody's out there offering to help you, they don't always have your best interests in mind. But I guess other than that, Susie McCarley did most of the work. Some work was also done by Patrick Doran, who again doesn't like us, which is fine. He doesn't have to like us. Patrick Doran did do some good work there, and. Yeah, I would say that the Joe Harms case was probably about a 90% win, if only because all the public pressure, not to mention all the time we spent, especially Susie, spent talking to him and keeping him sane and making him realize, yes, somebody cares. Yes, there's a way out of this. You've just got to, I wouldn't even say stay strong. You just got to stay the course. And yeah, well, it's a partial win because he
Right.
well he wound up with some minor convictions. He's out, and he's
I
free now.
noticed there's this theme that emerges in some of the stuff you talked about of counseling. So it's just kind of like, I assume that's not professional counseling, of course. You're more talking about just come alongside these guys and being friends with them and saying, hey, come on, buddy, it's not so bad, or, or things can go get better or something, or however you help them. But you
If
basically,
you yeah, if you ever get involved in even a single case, especially a case where there's a clear injustice involved, the system never wants to admit making a mistake.
right.
And that's because the people in it will have to answer for the mistake, and they don't want to answer for it. Um, you've got to sit and listen to their stories. You've got to ask them questions, and it's an incredibly emotional thing for them. And especially, there's no. It's not like you get a public defender and you get a psychologist to help you through it all. No, you get a shitty public defender, and any support you're going to get has to be from family or friends, because you're not going to have a job anymore. Most people lose their jobs who wind up in the system like this. So while they're waiting a year or 2 years for a just trial, and everything keeps getting put off. Meantime, no one will hire them except maybe as a baggage, a stock clerk or something. You wind up spending hours and hours and hours with these guys, not only going through the paperwork to figure out, all right, well, what's the cogent response to all this, but listen to them, break down, they cry, they get depressed, they want to give up. They start telling themselves, well, I must deserve this. And so I'm not saying Joe threatened to suicide, but suicide becomes a concern with these guys. I'm not saying Joe, that was the concern with Joe, but it was a subconscious fear of it, because guys who feel hopeless often punch out, right?
So who approached who between ABFM and Joe? It was ABFM that approached Joe.
That one I would have to think about, but I actually think Joe Harm's case started when he contacted Men's Rights Edmonton, and then
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
and then Men's Rights Edmonton was like, "Wow, I don't know what to do. Can you help him?"
And I
It went
think
from
I saw
there.
that somewhere on here.
Yeah. Well, that's
Yeah.
what sucks about running a men's rights group, and anybody who starts one should be ready for this, because you start a men's rights group and you're at all public. Pretty soon, some guy who's being screwed over by the system is going to contact you. And what's double hard about that is, and this is the truth, right? If you're going to do this kind of work, you've got to go in, looking for every scrap of evidence that they're guilty, because you don't want to be defending an innocent guy, or I mean, you don't want to be defending a guilty guy. Or if you are defending a guy who's guilty of something, you've got to know what he's guilty of and what he's not guilty of,
Right.
right? I mean, because sometimes they're guilty of having done something petty, but they're accused of having been done something horrible, and so you got to spend often weeks going over material with them, and that leads into personal conversations, which are very painful for them, and
Right.
even, and well, that's just one of the reasons it's hard and twisty and complicated. We could probably talk for 3 hours about Joe Harms.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Incidentally,
no, professional counseling, no, we can't do that. So,
obviously. Incidentally, by the way, I have this set to go private, so it's not going to go public as soon as this goes off. So I'm anticipating maybe I might have to do some editing or something.
I
But
don't know if you will, but okay, no problem.
anyway, so just to let you know. All right, so we're going to move along to one that you say you were more involved in. This is titled Star Crazy, The Dark Side of Polly Perrette, which relates to Francis Coyote Shivers, and from a March 25th, 2013 article by Paul Elam. This is actress Polly Perrette of the CBS series NCIS has been embroiled in a decade-long post-divorce court battle with her former husband, Francis Coyote Shivers. The March 27th sentencing of Francis Shivers is not where the story begins and clearly won't be where it ends. but it is a pivotal point in beginning to understand the history and possible future of this case. As I was looking over this material, I was going, wow, this has got some long strings that you can pull and so forth. So I just picked somewhere and picked some paragraphs here and go, okay, here we go. Shivers was without a doubt convicted of violating a temporary restraining order placed on him by a court at the behest of Polly Perrette. To be more specific, Shivers and his current wife walked into a sushi restaurant. They were known to frequent regularly, and they left the restaurant before being seated after Shivers spotted Perrette's boyfriend, Thomas Arkley, at a nearby table. There are conflicting reports about what followed, which will be the focus of a future article, but Shivers was later arrested for violating the terms of the temporary order. It is for that incident and that incident alone that Shivers is now facing sentencing on the March 27th.
Mm-hmm.
And quoting you in Francis Coyote Shivers' case, we worked with National Coalition for Men and private investigators and journalists to get the case with Francis out, promoted on all the major social media platforms, and attempted to spotlight the wrong done to him. AVFM was mentioned a few times in court. We had obviously annoyed the judge and Polly Perrette's team. So I'm going to love hearing about this.
Actually, I should step back a little bit. The judge was a little less annoyed than the prosecutor was. That prosecutor's fucking insane. Big, ugly, nasty, feminist prosecutor. And she was pissed. Too bad. In fact, if I can give a public official heartburn and make them angry and maybe even, cause them to have seizures, I view my job as done. Look, Coyote Shivers is innocent of any wrongdoing except for being foolish. If you look at the history of his conflicts with his ex, it's both a study in how the press will get behind a celebrity, especially a female celebrity playing damsel in distress.
Right.
And we'll just construct a narrative about the guy. One of the stories you read was on Fox News, was written by this reporter who's now with some Hollywood entertainment rag. He got fired from Fox News. But he was one of Polly Perrette and Bebe Buell's friends, and he was writing favorable coverage to slam Francis, i.e. Francis Coyote Shivers. So using his position in the press, to slam his friend Polly and Bebe, to slam Francis and to just put a horrible story out there about him.
Wow.
And he, unfortunately, he seemed to have spent years being very confident that this was all such obvious bullshit that the courts would eventually side with him. This is a case I'd have to call one where I don't know that the case is over yet. But that's had the worst outcome, right? He 9 months in jail for a restraining order violation.
Because he walked into a restaurant and she happened to be there?
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow.
I'll tell you, in Hollywood, this is the truth. You believe me or you don't. But I have this from former LAPD and private investigators who work there, okay? There is, in Hollywood in particular, there is a group within the LAPD. In case people don't know, Hollywood is in Los Angeles.
Right.
It's part of Los Angeles. Los Angeles is just big and sprawling, and the cops in one area will not be, it's all one force, but it's sort of like, what am I trying to say? The way the Hollywood police will work will be a little different than in other parts of Los Angeles, right? They're like I believe most of the local taxes in Hollywood go to fund the Hollywood police, not into the general LAPD fund. Sort of like school district funding, right? Your local taxes pay for your local schools, your local taxes pay for your local cops. So guess what? The Hollywood cops are paid by who? The rich people who live in Hollywood.
Beginning to see the light.
Yeah, and there is actually a unit. They will generally not admit to this, but there is a unit of plainclothes detectives, and I think probably a few uniforms, but I'm not sure, whose whole job is to protect celebrities from crazy people who might want to get them. Which you might think, oh, well, that sounds nice, but their job is also to protect celebrities from getting bad reputations and from being embarrassed in public because
Mhm.
they know who pays their salary. In
Right.
Francis's case, he did something foolish that I think he thought would protect him because, yeah, he and his wife, Maya, did go to a restaurant that they regularly frequented. It was one of their favorite restaurants. They were well known to go there regularly.
Hmm.
And for whatever reason, Francis chooses to tweet that he and Maya, his wife, are going to this restaurant.
Oh.
Okay. And so it's public that he's there and that he's going there. And what literally happened is that he tweets that, and sometime later he shows up, and Polly and her current beau are there. Francis doesn't know this. Francis and Maya don't know this. They walk in, they see him. They say, "Oh, we got to get out of here." Um,
Hmm.
there was a slight confrontation with not with Polly, but with her man.
Hmm.
They turned. There was some tussle over whether or not I think it was. And now I'm forgetting whether it was. Yeah, it was. I think it was Francis who tried to take a picture at least. Say, hey, "Oh, look here.
Hmm.
Here I am leaving." But anyway, they turn out the door and walk out the door, and there's squad cars waiting for them.
Ouch.
Now, why were those squad cars there?
Hmm.
It's not even just why was Polly and her guy there and her man there. Why was the squad cars there waiting for him? Um,
Well, that's pretty obvious. Twitter will bite you in the ass. You're
by
not.
yeah, by amazing coincidence, there happened to be some rollers out there. Just looking for trouble at the restaurant. Yeah, my ass. They were looking for Coyote. They were looking to make a bust. Coyote has never been charged with anything.
Hmm.
I mean, he's a classic case. He's not the only one because I know one of the other course cases we'll be talking about is one of these. Is a restraining order abuse case.
Hmm.
And what happens is you could go in in a lot of states um, and just tell a judge, I'm afraid for my life. This person's harassing me. They're going to hurt me. Give me an order to make them go away, and the judge will issue it. And there doesn't have to be due process. In fact, in most cases nowadays, the accused doesn't even have to be told that this hearing is being this hearing is taking place.
Hmm.
Um, it's called an ex parte, and it's overwhelmingly abused by women. Certainly, men can abuse it too, but it's mostly something women abuse because they can. I won't say it's because there's something wrong with women per se. These women, yeah, but it's because a man goes in there and says, "This woman is terrifying me, and I need you to save my life by getting her away from me." They're going to be skeptical. And when a woman goes in and says that, it's like, "Yeah, here's your order. Plus, can we give you a check and a free place to live?"
Hmm.
And that's just the way the system is. And uh,
That's just the way people seem to react.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
Gynocentrism, as has been talked about, seems to permeate our current culture.
that's right. Tell people a woman's in danger and they go insane trying to save her, whether she deserves it or not. And, you know, when Coyote married that girl, again, I've seen all this. When Francis Shivers married her, um,
Polly.
Paulie, yeah, when Francis Shivers married Paulie, he was the one with the career that was working.
Ah.
She was a waitress.
Mm.
By pure luck. Well, I mean, I'm not going to say she has no talent, but I mean, this is Hollywood. So getting A high-paying gig is not an easy thing to do. Most people, like most members of the Screen Actors Guild, report making something like $300-400 a year in their acting. Right? They've all got other jobs. She got lucky. She got on a show that was a hit. She got a character that was popular. She's a multimillionaire now. And so Coyote went from being a fairly successful DJ in the Hollywood area, which is not a bad gig, to married to a superstar. And, you know.
But she worked her connections through him. Is that what you're trying to say?
I don't know, although I'm sure that helped. Again, he would be considered a C-list celebrity in Hollywood, right? He'd done some moderately successful record producing.
I looked at that.
Yeah, like the music for the Kids in the Hall, that 90s comedy special, that sort of beach surf sort of thing. He had produced that was a house band called Shadowy Men from a Shadowy Planet. He was their record producer, but mostly he was a DJ, working in clubs, spinning records, talking to people. And since these were very successful clubs that Hollywood celebrities hung out in, people around Hollywood knew who he was. He was not important, right? He's not somebody who says, "Here, let me call this producer for you. I'll get you a job, honey." No, right. He's a known local in the Hollywood scene.
So he was, someone that she could network through because he would run into these types of people as a matter of course.
I would think so, yeah. Plus, I'm sure she had an agent and all that. I mean, let's not spin the tale that Coyote Shivers made Polly Perrette. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is she was nobody. She was a waitress in Hollywood when they got married. She got successful. Certainly, he was supportive of her career. And then it went south. As these things often do. I'm not going to say he was perfect, but you look at it and it's like you listen to Francis, and none of this is you won't find this anywhere but on A Voice for Men, right? You listen to some of the popular accounts and it's like, well, he's a deranged stalker, a loser who never got anywhere, who got involved with this successful actress so he could sponge off of her, and now he's mad. Wow. And he's dangerous. And it's like, no, that's not what happened. She was nobody when they got married. She was a waitress who was working as an actress, which is like, that's every waitress in Hollywood under 30. Right? That doesn't mean anything.
Right.
You're a waitress under 30 in Hollywood. Oh, so you're an actress.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to the right. That's what that was. And I'll just go ahead and say it. He came home and found her fucking a pizza delivery boy and decided, you know what? This isn't going to work.
Yeah.
All right. Now, since then, he also wound up getting married to a woman named Mayra Diaz-Gomez. And I think this is part of the issue. It's going to sound really catty, but I'm sorry. Polly's got a long habit of using restraining orders against people she doesn't like. She's done it to several other people before. She even got a restraining order against her friend Bebe Buell once.
Wow.
Well, they were angry at her. They were angry with each other. Now they're friends. She's done this before, and at this point, she's a multimillionaire, which means she can afford lawyers to do whatever she wants, and she can exploit the system however she wants. Francis is still just a DJ, right? So she's the rich one now. And what was it? I got sidetracked. Oh, yeah, look at his current wife, which I think is part of the story. I'm sorry. Somebody will get mad at me, but I'll be petty. Go ahead and use Google Images or Yahoo Images or whatever, and look for images of Polly Perrette. Then go look for images of the 10 years or more younger Mayra Diaz-Gomez, who's been in Playboy. And is just a red hot smoking Latina mama oh my God, is she hot? And you know where some of the anger is here.
Wow.
Yeah. But Polly's rich. Polly's got lawyers who will do anything she wants, and they know how to exploit the system. And the restraining order system is an obscenity. It's a civil rights trashing disaster. You can be tried in absentia. You get an order to stay away from somebody no matter what. And if you violate that order, even if you didn't even get to go into court and defend yourself on that order, you're going to jail for violating it. I don't know how anybody doesn't look at this and say that's wrong at every level of what we understand,
Yeah.
a fair trial to be.
Yeah.
Literally, we try. Yeah.
What you just said, that just kind of brings to mind different times when I've read different things critical of MRAs on some websites somewhere, and they'll mention something like, yeah, this guy says that restraining orders are screwed up and they're a violation of men's constitutional rights and they're terrible.
They
and
are.
so they'll spin that as, yeah, he said that because he hates women.
That's the classic go-to dodge for everything, right? We can just get away with any violation of constitutional, civil, and human rights by just saying, look, men like to beat on and harass and control women. We all know that, so we don't need due process. We don't need civil rights for criminals. And tell me how that's different from any other time in our entire history when we have denied people their civil rights. Tell me how, because I can't find a difference. It's all, those people are bad. We need to do something about them.
Yeah, but I've noticed that, especially if there's a race involved in the issue, like there's this guy that the Innocence Project just helped get out of prison. Can't think of his name, but Democracy Now! Did something on him. And his whole thing was he was put in jail because of a woman's dream. She dreamed that he was the one that raped her while they were doing the investigation. And so that wound up getting him set up. And years later, he finally gets set free. And I had made a comment on YouTube about, well, this is because of Believe the Woman. This is what this is all about. And think about this. If he had been a woman and a man had made that kind of accusation through a dream, how far would that have gone? Oh, no, it has to do with race. And it has, someone else is trying to come against me with that and say, no, this has to do with race. And racism is a white man's invention. And it's in the white man's psyche to be threatened by black men and blah, 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 blah. Okay, all this other stuff, racism, colonialism, war, slavery, sure, I don't deny that any of it ever happened, and I'm in agreement with what most people say about it. But let's separate the issues out here, folks. This was a man getting railroaded by somebody believing a woman's story. There's no doubt about it.
Well, that's exactly right, because there's not a shred of evidence. I mean, I've seen documentation on Francis's case literally going back 10 years. And it's a zoo, right? You're reading it and it's like, this man's never hurt a fly. And if you meet him and talk to him, I mean, he got no violent record. He's got no violence past. He's a DJ in Hollywood. He goes to clubs and spins tracks and talks and says, all right, everybody, shots, Jello shots, yay. He's that guy, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm going to play my guitar or my piano a little bit, and now let's spin some Motley Crue. He's that guy.
Yeah.
And he's got no history of violence. He's got no history of drugs. In fact, he's one of those weird Hollywood people who doesn't do drugs, from everything I can tell. He's just a really sweet, nice guy. Yet he supposedly got her in fear for her life. She's actually perjured herself on the stand. She's completely contradicted herself. She's provably lied. Let her sue me for saying that. I'm going to say it again. Polly Perrette, you have lied in court. We can prove it. We published the proof that she lied in court, and we got more. I shouldn't say we because I'm not directly in the case anymore because I'm not with it, but I kind of am, right? Because I'm still an NCFM member. I still talk to those involved, and right now we're waiting for Francis to get out of jail. The unconvicted, not convicted of any crime, spending 9 months in jail, Francis Shivers. Hopefully, when he gets out, we're going to be able to do something for him. But at the same time, it's like I expect a broken man to come out of there.
Unreal.
And yeah, it's disgusting. And in her case, it's an obvious case of being able to pay lawyers to keep this alive. And of course having the cops. Again, there's a whole unit of the LAPD that is there just to protect the interests of the wealthy celebrities who pay the property taxes to keep their department going. It's corrupt as fuck. It's unreal, and people will say you're a conspiracy theorist. Like, no, this is standard government corruption. This is how government corruption has always worked at the local level. The rich people have the cops and the judges in their pocket.
So in these particular cases that we're talking about, like you just said, you had read the whole history of the legal foibles that Cody Shivers had been through. You said he was never convicted of any violence or everything. So it involved researching and so forth.
He hasn't even got a pot bust in his background. I mean, nothing. He's clean as a whistle, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
So what was your particular involvement or so forth? Tell us about what you, Dean Esmay, did that you can recall involved in all this.
He had been waging his little battle for years, and because he had no money to wage it with, he was trying to use the court of public opinion. There's some YouTube videos out there that he did. There's a few others just documenting all the things that Paulie and her legal team were doing and trying to poke fun at them. And the Hollywood press would cover none of it. The national press would cover none of it. Anytime you found press, it was all written by friends of Paulie. And he turned to us in a last moment of desperation. I had contacted him once. I think it was through Twitter, and said, hey, if you ever need help, we know something about this. And he wasn't interested. And then it started getting really bad for him and looking like he was going, and he contacted me again. And I really much remember the first email I think that I got from him was saying, I got to be honest with you, I find the whole idea of men's rights activists kind of dumb and crazy, and I think we should be going for rights for everybody, but if I can tell you something, maybe you could help me. And now he's like, he's like a lot of these guys, right? Well, we don't need men's rights activists until suddenly they get up full in the, they're smacked in the face hard with the way the system really is.
They don't need it until they need it.
Yeah, they see no use for it until it happens to them. And now it's stuck, right? Because now they're an accused criminal, and who wants to be in charge? Who wants to be friends with an accused criminal or an accused deadbeat dad or whatever? And I actually just made the initial contacts, and then I got him in with some other people. So you'll see that Susie McCarley did most of the work. There was also a private investigator or two. I cannot tell you about those. There was a couple of lawyers involved in the scene that we were working with. Can't tell you about those. And there's the sad part, right? People who get involved don't want their names out there. That's just how bad it is, right? Those of us who are actually willing to put our names out there are taking a risk, and we know it. It's probably why I'll never get involved in a case in the state I live in. Because we've seen it, right? Local cops, local officials, local prosecutors, local judges, local sheriffs will start finding ways to give you shit because you're challenging the local system. Free tip for anybody who wants to get involved in a case. If you could do it in a foreign jurisdiction, it's a really good idea. Because going back 10 plus years, it was before I called myself an MRA, right? But I was still involved in some of these. I mean, a friend of mine, I can't tell you her name, but she was busy fighting feminists over child custody issues or whatever. And then all of a sudden, local officials sent Child Protective Services to go after her son and her grandchildren. And while that worked out okay, she was like, you know what? I'm out. They're coming for my family now. And
Yeah.
this is how brutal the system is to
Mhm.
people, and the people in charge of it is. So when they talk about conspiracy theories, dude, you don't need a conspiracy to have corruption.
No.
Lose the word conspiracy, please, and go to the word corruption, and
Mhm.
you're in the right ballpark. People in power want to keep power. People drawing a salary want to keep drawing that salary. And power seeks power, so they always want more power. They always want to establish little fiefdoms. I'm not saying there are no honorable people among police, prosecutors, and judges, but they're people, which means corruption, both financial and ideological,
Right.
happens. And just power corruption, right? This guy's a worm, I'm going to get him.
Hmm.
For the presumption of guilty or whatever. Or this guy's hurting my friend, I'm going to get him. And yes, I'm here to tell you, kids, in 2016, still cops, prosecutors, judges, there's still cops, prosecutors, and judges exactly like that. You can stop pretending that these pure things that you see in police procedure dramas are reality. Um,
What
so,
is Coyote Shivers in jail for at the moment?
violating a restraining order,
And that's that.
multiple violations.
Oh, okay. So the restaurant thing is just one thing that was thrown at him.
That was the last one that hit it. What that restaurant incident should tell you is they'll find any reason to get them.
Yeah.
And what's double funny about that is that in other parts of Los Angeles, it may be possible for you. Let's put it to you this way: what's a nasty part of Los Angeles? Um, I don't know. Let's just say if you were in a working class neighborhood in Hollywood,
Hmm.
none of this would have happened.
Hmm.
Nobody's got the money to pay the lawyers to keep going into the court to make bogus charge after bogus charge after bogus charge.
Uh-huh.
She's rich. She can do it. And I mean, people don't know, but NCIS, at least last I talked, is actually, in terms of Hollywood television shows, it's the most successful show in the world.
Mm.
Because it does well in the United States, or has, but overseas, it's like Hollywood's biggest television show exports.
Wow.
Pauly is making buku bucks. Everybody associated with that is making buku bucks. It's hugely popular worldwide.
Hmm.
Um, so we are talking about a multi-millionaire with a lot of money and a lot of ability to just throw shit at a guy. Um,
Hmm.
so I know we're generalizing, but the fact of the matter is, even if you believed everything Paulie Perrette said about her ex, if you believed all of it, he doesn't belong in jail. And you shouldn't believe all of it, because so much of it is obvious bullshit that doesn't survive 30 seconds of scrutiny once you know the other side. This is a big he said, she said, and it looks like the crazy one is Polly, because again, I'll repeat it. The documentation's on AVFM, but there's other documentation that's not public yet. Polly Perrette lied on the stand multiple times. She perjured herself, and the system is not doing anything about it, even though the documentation's in the system
Yeah.
and they've seen it.
I'll try to get when this is put out on YouTube. I'll try to put in copious links and so forth, so that people can go to all these different things and read the documentation and so forth. Um, so anyway, yeah, what you're telling me and about this whole thing about the restaurant and so forth. I mean, that's the classic thing of where a guy goes, boy, you think if you just do the right thing, you'll be okay, which is what it was. He innocently stumbled on to finding his ex there. He leaves because he knows that's the right thing to do, but he still gets in deep shit, and he's now in jail for it, according to what you just told me.
Yeah.
So tell me, what did you do to piss off the prosecutor? I'm wanting to hear about that.
If you actually look, we some of it I can't tell you. The case is still alive, I happen to know, but
Okay.
we caught that. The only thing she's missing is the colored hair. Okay, she's a
Mhm.
deranged feminist lunatic. is that prosecutor.
Uh-huh.
And she has actually screamed about us in court on Voice for Men, trying, I think, to tie him to a known hate group.
Okay.
All right. Which is, it doesn't hold water. It never has.
Right.
And we say fuck a lot. That's our hate group status, right? And
So does Bono. I guess he's a hateful individual then. I don't know.
we've published some stuff that's rude and obnoxious and crass, but that's what they have is, they're a hate group because rude, obnoxious, and crass. And AVFM only ever did that because it's like, this appears to be what it needs to be to get people's attention. But in any case, being crass like that. But we publish the serious stuff too. And it's interesting how the crass stuff gets more attention than this. And then things like this, right? And that really says something because people will focus on what's done to get attention to the issues, and then they'll focus on that as opposed to what the issues are. And I forget again, I lost my place, but I will say in the judge's credit, because I've been talking about bad judges and whatever, and the judge still did some things wrong here. But at one point, the prosecutor was complaining about A Voice for Men, and the judge's response is, yes, we'll read about this in A Voice for Men, and your side will read about it in TMZ. Next.
Wow.
Judge said that. So it's not like the judge is completely clueless, right?
Yeah, I get you. But you really got in somebody's skin when they do that because
yes,
the
and I feel so bad about that.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you do. But the thing is that's the standard procedure with a lot of this is let's not even, mention these guys. They don't exist. Who is there such a thing as a men's rights movement? But you had her so pissed off that she's going to say this thing because she's desperate and upset. We're going to tie him to a hate group, which is, who cares?
That must be proof that he's going to go and rape and pillage and beat and whatever. So yeah, Francis is in jail over basically without proper due process for no provable crime, except his biggest crime seems to have been he didn't keep stalking her, right? But he kept like talking about it in public, and she doesn't like that, and kept being defiant. What a lot of people counseled was that he move out of Hollywood and go find work elsewhere, and he wouldn't do that either. So he was well known for telling his friends and everybody he knew, this is what my ex is doing, this is what Polly's doing, look at this, and she don't like it. Well, she had his car taken from him at one point. She I don't know. Again, while I keep talking here, you also start getting hopefully a feel for the fact that if you get involved in one guy's case, you could spend 2 years doing nothing else.
Right.
And it's exhausting work. In fact, I've done enough cases now that it's like, I won't do another case. Because
this is March of 2013 when this article by Paul is that I just read, and the guy's still in jail. So really, it's not completely wrapped up then, I guess you'd say.
No, it's not. And I don't think I'll continue doing anything with the case. My main role early on was to just get the information of the case to the people who were going to do the work because, like I said, it's exhausting. And then you'll be on the phone with a guy and getting information, and then of course, something will happen, and you'll get emotional, and you wind up talking to him about it all. I mean, this happens in every case.
Right.
And literally you can spend 1,000 hours on one of these cases easily. And that's one of the reasons having been involved in a dozen or more over the years, it's like I can't even do them anymore. I can only refer people if there's anything for me to refer them to. And it's always very disheartening, but whatever. Now I'm just rambling.
Do you have anything more that you haven't told us about that? Because if not,
Francis Shivers. Oh, gee whiz. Yeah, I mean, I talked to friends of hers of Polly's who knew her 10, 20 years ago.
Kind of got her life patterns down pat there. Or
She's very fond of restraining orders. Francis was not her first target. Let's just put it to you that way.
I
And
believe it.
she was using them before she was rich. So that's my take on Polly. I don't think I missed any. I'm sure I forgot something because there's so much out there, but it's an
Okay.
interesting case, and I'll be interested to see where NCFM and AVFM go. I'll just be watching as a spectator.
Cool. Alrighty, the next one is an article titled "Injustice in Delaware." Gordon Smith. And to my understanding, this touches on somebody who's a politician's relative. Does it not?
I don't think so.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood. Anyway, August 13, 2012, the article is by Paul Elam, and this is just a short couple of paragraphs. On September 10th of 2012, Gordon Smith of Delaware is scheduled to face trial for terroristic threatening. If convicted of Class A misdemeanor, he faces up to a year in prison. The trial comes on the heels of a long string of arrests, 7 to be exact, all of them related to his former marriage and the child custody dispute that resulted from the divorce. None of the arrests so far have resulted in a conviction, and like all the other arrests, this case hinges exclusively on the word of his ex-wife. There is no other evidence in existence that he made a threat or ever did anything else illegal other than her accusation, and she has already been caught lying to police about other incidents. And you told me, for Gordon Smith, we provided fundraising, counseling, public documentation of all the wrongs done for him, of documentation for him of all the wrongs done, and wrote multiple articles calling out specific public officials such as Beau Biden and the state police chief for ignoring the crimes of Gordon's ex. Isn't that Joe Biden's son or something?
Beau Biden, yeah, we gave Beau Biden the late Beau Biden.
Yeah.
Sorry to the Biden family, even though I'm not fond of the Bidens. That's my favorite. Because that was
just one last sentence here. It says it culminated in her arrest after Gordon had proved his innocence no less than 8 times.
Yeah.
Talk.
That was probably the case, at least on A Voice for Men. There was stuff I got involved in before that. I didn't call myself an MRA then, but I was doing some of the same work. That one was a kind of a personal victory because I spent more time with Gordon than anybody else. Well, except this other, there's a couple of others I can't tell you about because, again, people in Delaware don't want to be associated because they don't want to get slammed, right?
Right.
We were working with some local people. I got Tiffany Marie Smith arrested. I'm so happy. I'm so proud of myself. I got a false accuser arrested. I did. I'm going to call it. I'm going to say I did it. I know I'm not the only one, but that was another restraining order abuse case. Restraining order abuse being one of the areas of men's activism that nobody knows about. Hardly anybody talks about restraining order abuse, and hardly anybody talks about paternity fraud. But they're real and they're viable issues. Restraining order abuse, Tiffany was being a typical, I'm going to say it straight up, a typical mentally deranged, cruel, obsessive woman who was using the system to torture her ex and keep her ex from seeing his children. That's what she was doing. She can go ahead and deny it if she wants. Clearly, this is what she was doing. And the system, I'm tempted to hold Beau Biden somewhat responsible just because of his dad and the family values that the Biden family holds to, which is that basically it's men's responsibility to protect women because men are bad. And
isn't Joe one of the main architects of VAWA?
Yes, he is. He's proud to call himself the author of the Violence Against Women Act, as well as its sponsor. He's even taught Joe. This is a change of subject, but Joe Biden, our current vice president, when he was in the Senate, was instrumental on that stuff. Joe's even talked about how when he was a kid, his sisters used to beat the crap out of him. Wow. And it's funny because you listen to him talk that way, And in the same sentence, without even drawing a second breath, he'll talk about how, well, I know, my sisters used to beat the crap out of me. Ha ha ha. So we got to do something about this violence against women problem. I don't know how that logic works for people, right? But this is the mentality. Delaware's a small state.
Mm-hmm.
And a small state, everybody who's political knows everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And, his son, Bo, is, someone will have to forgive me. It's been a couple of years now. I think Bo was the attorney general. Or was he the governor? No, he was the attorney general. Well, whatever.
I can look it up. Keep talking.
This was in his bailiwick for sure. That's why I mentioned him. But no, the cops there have the same attitude that you find in so much else in the United States. Woman's in trouble, do something about it. Tiffany, and this is all police. This goes to another thing too. I'll just say here, which is that people will say, "Well, the law doesn't read that way. VAWA doesn't read that way. VAWA is gender neutral. Its title is the Violence Against Women Act is gender neutral. The title says women, but the language is not gendered for the most part within the bill." And it's like, yeah, but both the title and what we call police procedure and police training. Mm-hmm. And the operant assumptions that the cops work under and the operant policies that they work under by default are believe the woman unless you absolutely can't anymore. Right. And don't believe the man unless you absolutely have no choice but to believe him. And literally Gordon Smith was arrested 8 times because Tiffany would call the cops and say he did this, he did that, he's trying to kill me, go get him. They'd go get him, they'd arrest him. There'd be little to no evidence that he had done anything at all, except try to see his kids. And they'd arrest him anyway, simply because they said so. She said he violated. And then when there was no evidence that he had, they let him go. You'd think around the 5th, 6th, 7th call, where there's no evidence he's done anything, they'd think, well, maybe she's crazy, but no, they just kept doubling down and getting more abusive. And when you got a guy who's getting arrested 2-3 times a year, can't hold the job, so he's been economically destroyed. He's psychologically worn out. And I don't remember, I think it was a total of 11 bullshit arrests. We finally got one where, follow this, okay? Follow this. He's been arrested something like 10 times now. I think it was a total of 11. There was 3 of them where it was indeterminate what had happened, and like 8 of them where it was obvious he was innocent. On this the 8th time he was charged, he had, from a previous supposed violation, been put on an ankle bracelet. Yikes. So that he would be monitored 24/7. Now stop and think about this. He wasn't charged or convicted of anything, but he was on an ankle bracelet because his ex kept saying he was violating. So he's on an ankle bracelet without due process. He's mostly confined to his home. They know where he is 24/7. He's got the ankle bracelet on. They come out of nowhere. They arrest him. They're screaming at him. They're saying, "You finally fucked up this time. You fucked up this time. You're going down, man. You're going down." This is according to Gordon, right? They take him. They slam him in. They won't tell him what he did. They will not tell him what he did, but they slam him into a cell and they make him wait there for hours. Nobody to talk to, no nothing. And then finally a detective comes in and is really nice to him and apologizes to him and tells him, "Okay, Tiffany's gone too far this time. We're really sorry." Because what Tiffany Marie Smith had done is she was, I forget if she called from her cell phone or if she had somebody call. Essentially, the story goes is that she's found in a ditch, scratched up and bloodied. And she produces a note from her purse, written with a pen that's in her purse, supposedly from Gordon, telling her that he's gonna kill her. He's going to make her regret all this. Now, again, this is a note supposedly from Gordon that's in her purse, written on a pen that's in her purse. And the story is she's in the ditch because he tried to kill her and he beat the shit out of her and he left her in the ditch. And for whatever strange reason, he had left the note with her that he must have put in her purse or something. The story's already incoherent, right? But they run and arrest him anyway because obviously he was trying to kill this poor girl. And eventually they go and look at the tracking data on his ankle bracelet and determine that the charge is completely not sustainable. He was never within miles of her during the entire time of this supposed assault and threat to kill her. And it's clear he didn't write the note. It's not his handwriting. It's a forged note. And still, they don't actually act to do anything to her, but they do apologize to Gordon. But get the grand irony here. He's on an ankle bracelet without due process. And so only by violating his constitutional rights was he able to prove his own innocence. Because the ankle bracelet data was definitive. He was never in the whole time, even conceivably within a few miles of her. She made it up. There's just no question she made it up. She made it up. And the state's own evidence shows she made it up. We wind up making call. We urge a bunch of people on AVFM to call. We urge them to write. We help him raise some more money. I wrote a really nasty, stinging article. I'm pretty sure it was addressed to the colonel, the head of the Delaware State Police wears the title of colonel. I'm guessing that's a 200-year tradition or something, probably. But he's the head. And I wrote a really, really sarcastic article and sent it to them, calling him out by name, because I find that the best way to get a public official's attention is not to write to him or talk to him, but to put his name in print and make him, see his name in print, mocking him. And I can't remember what the title of the article is, but if you look at it, I remember one of the phrases I used, because I was being typical of voice for men crass, right? The phrase I used was "shit bird with tits." At least in certain parts of the country, of the U.S., police know what a shit bird is. I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase "shit bird."
I've heard the phrase.
All right, a shit bird. Some cops they'll call them mooks or whatever. Basically, a shit bird is somebody local who's basically dumb and keeps committing stupid crimes and keeps getting caught. And they're always pathetic, low-level things like drunk driving and breaking and entering and getting into a fight in a bar, habitual low-level offenders. And this woman's a classic shitbird, but of course she's a woman, so she must be angry, or she must be innocent somehow. But I said, do you not know what a shitbird is? If so, here's a shitbird. It's just a shitbird with tits. Now, I wrote that and people got mad at me, but it clearly got their attention. It just really clearly did. Because she was arrested within 48 hours of my writing that and sending it to him, and urging people in the AVFM community to call, to write. We ran a campaign where we wrote to every single, that was an election year, we wrote to every single candidate, wrote or called every single candidate who was running for the state legislature that year. We were just loud as fuck, saying, what are you doing? Look at what you have done to this innocent man.
I think I found your article.
I was not nice.
Cop 101 Lessons for Delaware State Police, August 30th, 2012, by Dean Esmay.
That's right, Cop 101 Lessons. See, I got family and friends who are cops, so I'll be honest, that is a really sarcastic piece, and if you know anybody who's a cop who reads that, he'll go, ooh, because there's some remarks in there that only a cop would get, but it would totally get under the cop's skin and embarrass them to their other cops.
Do you care if I quote from you here?
Go ahead. I was mean, but go ahead.
Furthermore, there is a particular subspecies of the shitbird that some who are new to police work often fall prey to. cops around here recognize it as the shitbird with tits. You might direct your attention to the photo at the top of this article, for example, of this common subspecies of shitbird. The shitbird with tits is often cute, given to perky smiles, gulping sobs, big eyes, whining, trembling on demand, fluttering hands, and occasionally lightly touching you on the forearm while looking up at you submissively. You know, a lot like Tiffany Marie Smith, pictured above.
Yes, and that's, yeah.
And we also have a term for a cop who gets snowed by a shitbird with tits. Around here, we call that a rookie.
Yes, yes, yes. I know I annoyed them, and I feel terrible about it.
I could tell.
There's just no way a sane human being could say that Tiffany Marie Smith was not guilty and that Gordon Smith was innocent. Sorry, there's just no way. And Tiffany got arrested, and Tiffany got charged, and Gordon got access to his kids back. I call that a win. Now, yeah. I call that a real win. And I embarrassed the entire Delaware police and prosecutor establishment.
I see why you don't want to do anything local. Yes. Oh my God. I wouldn't want cops looking for revenge on me either for that.
No. And you might go, what was that necessary? I contend that it was. Because the system wants these things kept quiet. Like, why was none of the local press covering this story?
Mm-hmm.
Why were none of them? Gordon, he's not a big guy. He had gotten the Libertarian Party nomination to go to the Delaware State House, so he was technically a politician, but he's a Libertarian candidate. He had no chance of winning. Plus, he was arrested twice while he was running for it. So, wow. Of course, he didn't win, but the point is, we got this idea that if you have a just case and a just cause and you just show people what's going on, they'll listen. No, they won't. And this is why I came to the conclusion. It's one of the reasons I joined AVFM, despite the reputation for being obnoxious and, bash a violent bitch and fuck you and kiss my ass and all that stuff, is because it gets people's attention.
It does.
And attention is actually what's needed in these cases. Okay. I just really, I mean, I'll admit it. Look at some of those things I said. This is called a rookie. Let me give you some basic lessons in being a cop while you're talking to the head of the state police. It infuriates them, but then they're like, and I can't refute him. Right, and it gets action, and it did get action. I'm prouder of that case than any case I ever worked on, because we won. I mean, there was a lot of people, not just me, but yeah, we won on that. We straight up won.
That is so cool, and that's where it's all at, is actually getting justice for men. And it sounds to me like this is the most clear-cut case of actual justice, and it actually came to a decent conclusion. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, there has been, Gordon still sees his kids, and Tiffany, although she got a wrist slap, sadly, Tiffany, in the 2 years or so, was it 2012 or 2013?
2012 is when you wrote that article, I believe.
And then she got arrested within a week or two of that, and that was all it took, right? A night in jail, and police looking at her like they're not her friend anymore, and she stopped. All the allegations stopped, all the crazy stopped, efforts to stop Gordon from seeing his kids stopped. And that's one of the things I also believe, which is a lot of these people who are involved in restraining order abuse, it's mostly women, although I'm sure there are men out there who can abuse it, especially if they have money. But the truth of the matter is, if the system was generally more inclined to give false accusers a hard time. Most of these false accusers keep doing it because they face no consequences whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, their consequence might be all they managed to do was throw their ex in jail for the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's what they accomplished, and they feel good and they feel powerful, and they use the system to make that happen.
Yeah.
The system, there's no disincentive. And so if you're crazy, you're egotistical, you're neurotic, and the system keeps telling you you're basically right, or the system doesn't give you everything you want, but it gives you some of what you want. They locked him up. They put him in jail. Ha ha, he had it coming. All that stuff. The minute, that's probably a personality disordered person, woman in most cases, but probably somebody's personality disorder or bipolar or something like that.
Yeah.
They're getting a thrill out of doing this. They're getting a power thing out of doing this. And the one thing they fear is being embarrassed. Once they get embarrassed, they're like, I don't ever want to do that again.
I looked, and you're right. Beau Biden was Attorney General at that particular time.
Yeah. I think he passed away early last year. I can't remember.
I believe so, yeah, and that's one of the reasons why Joe decided not to throw his hat in the ring with this election. The tragedy and so forth. So, I mean, was there anything, you said there was some link to him, or he had some, what was it again?
Let me put you this way. There were people in the Georgia political, or the Delaware political establishment who knew about all this.
Calling out specific public officials such as Beau Biden and the state police chief.
Yeah, well, his prosecutors were doing nothing, and the state police chief was doing nothing. In fact, I don't know if it's in that article you mentioned or one of the other articles I wrote about it, but I had called out, I remember there was some local cops. I don't remember which city it was in, but there were some local cops who did the right thing. In reporting this as problematic behavior, at least, as having some real concerns. It was the staties who were the most obnoxious and the most irresponsible.
The people at the state government level is what you're saying.
Yeah, the locals for the most part. In fact, if you think about it, small towns in a small state, everybody knows everybody. You figure the local cops had Tiffany's number much quicker than the staties did.
You would think so. Yeah.
It was, and so this was a Delaware state problem. This wasn't Dover police. This wasn't, whatever. This was at the state level, especially again because Delaware's a small state. In fact, Delaware would probably be practically nothing but a large county in Texas or California, right? Small place. Everybody knows everybody, which is kind of a benefit in a story like this because everybody knows everybody. It only takes a few of them to see the stories and to get some phone calls before everybody's like, hey, Beau, what's this? We got an election coming up in a month. What's this?
Yeah.
And that's all part of battlefield strategy, I think, when you're working a case like this.
I wanted to touch on something you said way back when you said something about VAWA. You said it is basically gender neutral, or it's not gender despite its title. Is that correct? I understand you.
Sure. To change the subject, but one of the classic feminist and general, supporter of VAWA dodges is to point out correctly that most of the language of the Violence Against Women Act, and it's a very long act, right? Most of it is phrased gender neutral.
Right.
It calls people offenders or accused. It doesn't say men, women. However, from the title alone,
right,
you know what it's about, and this is what people miss, right? They'll say the whole Constitution is written in mostly gender neutral language, right? That doesn't mean anything. Because police are trained on how to implement it. Guess who's in charge of implementing Violence Against Women Act policies, procedures, and training for cops and prosecutors? Mostly ideological feminists teaching the Duluth model.
Yeah.
And the Duluth model is all about how violence is all based on men's patriarchal need to control and dominate women and make them submit and be the man's property.
Right.
And they treat this as if this is what abuse looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And they treat cops as trained cops. This is what abuse looks like. This is what a woman who's being stalked and harassed looks like. And yes, it can be a man too. Go ahead, be open-minded. It can be a man too. But anyway, this is how men behave, and this is how the women who are running from them, that's how they get trained. So
the reason I asked you that question is because it was just a couple of years ago that I saw some emails from Sage Services, which I know you're pretty familiar with them.
Before I went to AVFM, before I called myself an MRA, I was a volunteer for Sage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Where was I? Oh, yeah. They had something about getting gender neutral language into VAWA. So was there a part of it that wasn't gender neutral, or?
I don't know how the current legislation reads as amended completely. I do know that SAVE and some others, they deserve credit because they got a lot of the gender, they got a lot of the gendered language out.
Right.
They also managed to get some requirements for funding some programs for men to help men. But I remember also that when it happened, I looked at it and said, and this is not really a knock on SAVE so much as who I am, because I promoted them on my old blog for many years. I had been involved in phone conversations, done some volunteer work, etc. And they were real proud of the way they got VAWA amended. And I looked and it's like, okay, so you made the language more gender neutral and you got a fig leaf of some minor requirements that they start trying to help men. But in the final analysis, nothing that big has or had changed. SAVE appears to be working on the incrementalist approach of, every 7 years or so, VAWA is going to come up for renewal. And maybe we can get we can cut a few more chinks out of it to make it better.
I seem to remember in the press there was comments like, okay, HuffPo ran something called VAWA picks up an unhelpful ally, meaning the MRM. And somewhere I read an off comment like the only people that like the latest VAWA is the MRAs or whatever. And so somebody wasn't happy with whatever was done.
Save Services, and again, I'm not knocking them because they do something necessary, has been fighting since the 90s to get things improved. They absolutely do not identify as an MRA organization.
Oh, yeah.
They'll get them accused of being an MRA organization. They'll get accused of being right-wingers because there's some actual Republicans in there. So, wow, they must be radical right? They're radical right-wingers. There's Republicans in there. Like, whatever. There's Democrats there, too. I know. I used to talk to SAVE people, but whatever. There's Republicans in there, so evil right-wing conspiracy. My frustration came when I just realized if you don't have millions of dollars in campaign contributions to spread around to members of Congress to help them get reelected, for the most part, they're going to pat you on the head and nod and make sympathetic noises and change as little as they can get away with changing. And some good things have come out of that last VAWA renewal, which SAVE can take credit for, which is that some localities, they have taken seriously the requirement that they have to offer some kind of shelter services for men. Most of them are doing as little as they can. I got at least one report I can't confirm, but which I nevertheless find believable, that at least one feminist group running shelters, when the local state officials started telling them, look, the law requires us to give services for men, you need to do this, they decided they'd just rather get out of the business of offering shelter services.
Wow. There's one in Texas that's supposed to be starting up this year, an actual shelter for men I've heard about. I wonder if that's really
there's a few. I think there's one in actually, if you go to, believe it or not, if you go to Save Services, they've got a page that they've set up that lists shelters that will give accommodation to men. And I think they keep that up to date. So if you go look at them at their page, they'll list some. What's sad is their list appears to be exhaustive, as in it lists. There may be somebody they missed, but I don't think a lot. And it's a pathetically short list of pathetically inadequate services. I mean, you know, here's a shelter that says they might be able to give you get you a hotel room for a night.
That's what I noticed. A lot of them are is just vouchers for hotels.
Yeah. Or, you know, we got 20 rooms, and here in this house we have one for a man. That kind of thing, you know, and it's like, well, and that's just kind of when I started deciding. So if I wait another 50 years, maybe this will all even out. And I don't want to wait 50 years. It's why I started saying, fuck you, assholes. You're bigots. You hate the Constitution. You hate equal rights. And I'm going to make sure you hear it and everybody hears it. You people are monsters. You're disgusting. I start talking like that, and all of a sudden attitudes change. Of course, I get people saying, you're obnoxious, you're making it worse. Sometimes fuck you actually gets you what you want. And it's not, it's attention, and it may be negative, but people have to turn and look, or they'll even start arguing with you. And then when they start arguing with you, it's like, and here's my evidence. And they can't say anything, right? Except, well, anyway, that's a philosophical discussion, but it's why I never apologize for being obnoxious. I'm sorry. I just won't apologize for that.
So I got you off the track on Gordon. Do you have anything else that you wanted to relate on that?
As always, you know, nobody is a perfect person. I'm sure if somebody goes investigating Gordon, not that he has a big criminal record or anything, but it's not like he always made the best choices. It's not like, and it's true of all these guys. And I would emphasize that, you know, I find that one of the efforts, this is what the smear merchants will do. They'll take a guy who's been accused, and they'll find something about him not to like.
All right.
So that they can talk about that, and they can erode sympathy for him and change the conversation away from the heart of the matter, which is civil rights, human rights, men being falsely imprisoned, children being denied their fathers.
Right.
Those are the real issues. And what they'll do, I even had a reporter once, a real sleazy one, I have to think, from the Daily Beast, you know, wrote some things that were moderately supportive, but some other things that were not really honest, and just attacking me once for getting involved in one case because he thought the guy we were defending was a slime. And he was obviously reading his stuff from Man Boobs. And I'm like, number one, get a more credible source. Number two, tell me why these negative things you said about this guy have anything to do with the fact that his civil rights have clearly and unambiguously been violated.
Right.
And of course, he just kind of slunk away and said no more. And that wasn't Gordon Smith's case, but I got some of that, you know, with Gordon. Got some of it with all of them, right? Because you can say something nasty about anyone, and if you don't keep your eye on the ball, which is civil and human rights, you've missed it, right? Because and what you're saying is, I can only work to help saints. I can only work to help pristine people who everybody agrees is really just Jimmy Stewart from Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. You know, those are the only. It is a great movie. It's not realistic, but it's a great movie.
Yeah.
Like, everybody we help will be a perfect person who's clearly a paragon of every human virtue known to man, who's just been. No, people are people, and they're imperfect. And so, again, I'm just repeating myself, but I'll say it one more time. If you're diverting to this or that, you know, this guy's got a drinking problem. That guy, well, he once said this obnoxious thing, or he once did this stupid thing. If you're taking the eyes off the ball as to constitutional rights violations, civil rights violations, human rights violations, the right of children to know and have their fathers in their lives, if you're taking your eye off of that ball, you're doing it wrong.
Right.
So.
Well, yeah, and that's what you have to keep in mind, because I mean, even if, you know, I'm constantly promoting the 100 or so lawsuits that you can go on Boys and Men Education and see all the lawsuits against colleges and universities.
Thank God
You
for
know,
those lawsuits.
absolutely. And can I say I know what exactly went on in all of them? No, but I can sure say a lot of the more high profile ones have been shameful as far as the way a lot of these men have been treated.
Oh, goodness.
And you know, bottom line is they felt their civil rights were violated at the point of due process.
That's because they were.
That's right.
And really, I don't care if these guys are, oh, are all 100 of those guys perfect human beings?
Mhm.
Did any one of them ever once play grab ass with a girl when he shouldn't have? I don't know. I do know he's having his rights violated and he's having his life destroyed.
Yeah.
And again, that's what's important. That's actually what feminists and others will do. Well, yeah, but he did something. Well, A, you don't know that. And
Mhm.
B, who cares?
Yeah. Right now they have 107 lawsuits and counting. I just am not looking at it.
I seriously hope that multiplies by 10 or
Oh,
100. I
oh,
really do.
I do too. I do too. Okay, so we ready to move on to Joel Kirk?
Sure, I'm gonna go refill my coffee. Hang on just a minute, okay?
All right, you do that. Okay, while he's gone, I'm going to go ahead and start reading this. This is from an article dated October 8th, 2012 by Dr. Tara J. Palmatier. And it's titled The Real Housewives of Harrison County. It's the story of Lieutenant Colonel Joel Kirk. And this reads, if you have been following the ongoing case of judicial malfeasance in Harrison County, you know that Lieutenant Colonel Joel Kirk and his children have suffered and continue to suffer egregious abuses at the hands of Judge Lori Bettler Jackson and Tina Kirk's attorneys, Thomas Smith Jameson, Jamie Cooper, and Afron Hudson Amon. Given the evidence that documents Tina's unfitness to parent, Judge Jackson would have to be deaf, dumb, and blind, or dangerously anti-father biased, or arrogantly corrupt to give any unsupervised access to this known child abuser. But that is precisely what Judge Jackson has done. As for Tina's attorneys, well, one could argue that they're just doing their jobs, but in reality, they are aiding and abetting a documented child abuser in her efforts to continue to abuse the children and bleed the colonel dry. And you told me you got an incompetent ideological judge thrown off the case and made enough noise in West Virginia that Joel Kirk eventually won most of what he asked for. His children were ultimately removed from their abusive mother.
Uh-huh.
Talk to me.
Now, I should say the person who did most of the work on that case was Dr. T.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Tara Palmatier. Some of the work was done by me. Some of the work was done by Paul Elam. Some of the work was done by people I can't tell you. Although Suzanne McCarley was part of that too. They were local on the ground activists. There's frequently local on the ground activists that we don't name. And I think we've established earlier why we don't name them.
I think.
But I mean, West Virginia is a small state full of small towns, right?
Yeah.
So when you have activists running around a town of passing out flyers and putting up posters, calling out a judge by name and calling out people by name, people notice. And we did a lot of that. Again, we had email campaigns, we had publicity campaigns, we had some coordination with people on the ground. I've talked to Joel, I've talked to his mom, actually, I don't know that I ever spoke directly to the kids because that seemed inappropriate. But we had the documentation. The documentation was unbelievably damning. I mean, we wrote in print that a woman's a child abuser. We wrote that.
Right.
You understand that our writing that is an invitation to a lawsuit if it's not true, an invitation to a big lawsuit if it's not true. But here's how it works. In court, the truth is an impregnable defense. So I'm going to repeat it again. That woman's a child abuser.
Yeah.
And we photographic evidence, we have the testimony of the children, we have the testimony of psychological experts, we have recordings of, I mean, we had all of this, right? Including recordings of her being completely deranged, violent, and abusive. She's insane. And those kids, I mean, it's a clear case of child abuse. It was a clear case of a judge clearly favoring the woman because she was a woman. That's all she wrote, right? Because we'd even had, if I recall right, we'd even had an earlier judge who was not quite insane, but this judge is completely insane. I mean, she was just, we had evidence of her. We had there was recordings of her screaming at, yelling and beating the children. All right. This is not a joke. And the judge just decided to exclude that because it was prejudicial.
Oh my.
Okay. Now this shit happens, and people will say the guy must have done something. You must be exaggerating. No, stop taking a middle ground. The courts were defending a child abuser straight up. And what we did, I mean, we contacted people all up and down the judiciary there, including multiple members of the West Virginia Supreme Court, other politicians. We were postering and flyering in certain areas, and we were writing stories on A Voice for Men that people all over West Virginia were reading. And I'm going to call it that this is like, you can say it's rabble rousing or whatever, but when the system's not working, you take it to the court of public opinion, and people will say, don't do that because that's mob justice or whatever. No, fuck you. The system's broken. And people need to know the system's broken. And here's exactly how broken it is. Boom. Here, look. And when they can't deny it anymore, especially when the public officials can't deny it anymore, they either get a conscience, because I've been involved in more than one case where a judge wound up privately apologizing. I've been involved in a few of those. That's never public record, of course.
Right.
Which it should be, but never mind. At least they apologize privately sometimes. Yeah, eventually, I forget whether it was the West Virginia Supreme Court or one of the, I'm just drawing a blank because it's early. What's the layer between a local circuit court and the Supreme Court? There's an appeals court or whatever. They have different names for it.
Appellate or whatever?
Yeah, I think an appellate judge. Basically, they would, of course, deny that the public pressure had anything to do with it. They might even deny having seen it. But a judge, a higher level judge, looked at something or other, and for some mysterious reason known only to that judge, ordered that, was it Luann? Oh, Lori Bettler was the judge, right. Luann Barton was a clerk, I believe, who was also implicated in some of this. Lori Bettler Jackson, I mean, she got a brother who's a sheriff and stuff like that. But anyway, she got ordered to recuse herself from the case by a higher judge, which is another way of saying you're going to pull yourself off this case or I'm pulling you off.
Now, is she still a judge?
I'd have to look. In that part of West Virginia, we determined that the judges are elected, not appointed. And so typically the only way to remove a judge in a practical sense is to get them turned out in the next election. And I remember when we were working this case, she was several years from facing re-election. So I'm going to guess she's still on the bench. I haven't followed her antics because I had other cases to work. But I know
she is. Honorable Lori Bettler Jackson, County Government Office.
The child abuser enabling judge, Lori Bettler Jackson of West Virginia. Is that the child abusing judge you're talking about? Yeah.
I believe that must be.
Yeah. And sure, she still got her job. I hope get another judge fired near me, but I can't tell you about that.
I've got a video here. Judge Lori B. Jackson sends children back to their abuser.
That may be one of Gordon's. That may be one of Joel Kirk's. That may be Joel Kirk's case. It might be a different case. I'm not sure. And maybe she learned a lesson. I don't know. What I do know is that we got those kids to where they were spending. Subsequent bad things happened because mom still, even though the evidence of child abuse is overwhelming, even according to the testimony of the kids, they still are forced to spend some time with their mom. The last I heard, the older son, who's probably pushing 18 now, just refuses to see her. The daughter still sees her sometimes. But at least Joel was, he and his mother have the children full time. And that's a win. And they're not going to lose their home, which there was a chance they were going to do that. That one was what I'd call an 85% win. And I'll take it because I know the number one thing I did was that everybody in the West Virginia judiciary was a little scared and embarrassed. And you know what? I'm good with that. I'm real good with that. Because public officials, let's get this straight. Judges and prosecutors are public officials. They have a duty to the citizens, and the courts especially like to maintain this veneer, this aura of being above it all and above the politics and purely dedicated to the law. My ass, they're human beings. They're going to be corrupt, just like they're going to be as corruptible as any other elected official. I'm not saying they're all corrupt, but they're all as corruptible as any elected official. In fact, judges and prosecutors may be more corruptible because they don't have to face public scrutiny anywhere near as often. And so you hear that the system has done something and you can't put a face and a name to it. Well, it's important to start putting names and faces to it. This prosecutor did this. This judge did this. Here's their name. Here's what they look like. Here's how they got into office. Here's what they did. This is no different. And I've had people act like we're doing something dishonorable. I'm like, excuse me, these are public officials. In fact, freedom of speech and freedom of the press exists more than anything else. You can talk all you want about freedom of expression and how important it is that we all be able to say what we think because of the principle of free speech and free press. At the most root level, free speech and free press are there so that you can criticize public officials.
Absolutely.
And embarrass public officials and humiliate public officials and get them fired if necessary. That's what they're really for. Yeah. And I'm sorry, judges and prosecutors and cops, you're public officials. Your duty is first and foremost to protect and serve the citizenry. And when you're failing that, I feel no sorrow for you whatsoever if you are hideously embarrassed in public.
Indeed.
I know it sounds primitive, but some of these people, some of these corrupt prosecutors, judges, cops, I've run into, sometimes I think we should bring back the stocks and make it and make it legal to throw tomatoes at them while they're in the stocks. I mean, I'm being facetious, but really,
I think even considering the fact that they have an embarrassment on their record, like being thrown off the case, sometimes they just wind up getting reelected anyway. I don't know if you're familiar with the documentary Witch Hunt about going down there in Southern California, the big, huge, supposedly pedophile ring that the cops were claiming and all this, and they talked to all these kids and saying all this stuff that didn't happen. The Innocence Project got involved in all that, and there was one guy that was actually sent to San Quentin for a few years over it. But anyway, that guy that was the DA at the time, I mean, he even admitted, hey, we like cowboy justice around here. And, he was still reelected several times even after all that took place. And finally, he decided not to stand for reelection. So sometimes for some reason, people just think, well, a guy, I don't know if they think a guy like that is so vigilant that they'll throw even the wrong people in jail, will by osmosis throw the right people in jail as well. I don't know. I don't know what they think, but somehow they still get reelected by the dumb public.
They do, and they'll. And it's not all of them, right? I mean, some of these people are appointed, not elected. Some of them are whatever. But even the ones that are appointed, whether it's an appointed prosecutor or appointed judge or whatever, you're still a public official. Free press. Look at the First Amendment in its real core. It says Congress shall make no law. Well, but it goes into, respecting the freedom of the speech, the freedom of the press, the right of the people to peaceably assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances.
Yeah.
Petitioning the government for redress of grievances like, hey, you incompetent fuckhead, you put an innocent man in jail.
Yeah.
That's a grievance, motherfucker. All right? Yeah. And that's what the press is supposed to be for, not ludicrous stories about how women are oppressed by air conditioning. Sorry, do you remember that story that was in the Washington Post? Oh my God.
Yeah, something about that. Not sure, but yeah, I think I remember something about that.
Or whatever, the latest shit on TMZ over what this or that celebrity's doing. No, if you're not being a watchdog for government officials, well, I don't know. What are you doing? You're writing clickbait.
Absolutely.
You're masturbating and watching at the antics of Hollywood celebrities rather than asking what really affects the life that we're all in here.
Well, anyway, so what did Dean Esmay do? Did you have any parts in all this actively that you'd like to share that you haven't shared?
I don't remember if I wrote any single article. Actually, could you hold on just a minute? I'll be right back.
Right. Well, I can take a quick look here on A Voice of Men and see if Dean wrote any articles. I'm going to go to the search and just look up Judge Lori Jackson and or Lieutenant Joel Kirk or whatever. So I don't think I saw any articles written by Dean on this, but you never know. Judge Lori Jackson and the First Amendment. I do have an article written here by Dean Esmay on Judge Lori Jackson and the First Amendment, and dated October 4th of 2012. Yes, Your Dishonor, please do seek to enjoin us to take down the information which proves that you sent children to live with the mentally ill, violent child abuser. Also, while you're at it, please issue us an order to stop saying mean things about you, you incompetent idiot who almost certainly shook your law degree out of a Cracker Jack box. Please feel free to add me to your court order by name, you incompetent child abuse enabling baboon. I'll make sure copies of your order gets published prominently everywhere, along with my opinions on what I think about your order, Your Dishonor.
Hello. It's funny,
I just found your article that you wrote on Judge Lori Jackson.
It's funny when you've done enough of this, you can't even remember what you wrote. Yeah, now I remember that particular article. Again, was I trying to get under her skin, do you think?
I wonder.
I stand by every word, mind you.
I believe you.
But and other judges on that circuit, as well as the appellate and Supreme Court, got copies of that too. Just so you know, I don't know if they read them, but I have a feeling. And so I don't remember why we were talking. I said I couldn't remember if I'd written anything or not, because other things I had done were all behind the scenes. Including, again, working with people on the ground, working with efforts to contact public officials, phone calls, emails, other things I still can't tell you about. I mean, not breaking the law, but I mean, this is the thing. When you've decided you're going to try it in the court of public opinion, do it. Make sure everything you say can be documented. And you're not only lawsuit proof, you're never lawsuit proof exactly, but it's one of those, because they've had people threaten to sue me. But fortunately, I've been in publishing for decades. I know, at least under American law, what you can say and what you can't say. And the truth of the matter is, I've had people try to tell me I'm wrong, but I'm not. Truth of the matter is, when it comes to libel and slander laws, the truth is an impregnable defense.
Any anecdotes that you like to share about this case?
We're still talking about Judge Lori Jackson, the
And
West Virginia,
Joe
the
Kirk.
child abusing judge, and Joel Kirk.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it still wasn't a whole win, right?
Mhm.
The gold digging child abuser still walked away with a lot of money that she didn't earn. She destroyed Colonel Kirk's military career. He had to retire as a lieutenant colonel. If he'd managed to keep his family together, he probably would at least have retired a full colonel. In fact, the situation with him had been so bad. There was a phone call that he actually had a conversation. He had a recording of, and I listened to. He was on deployment in Afghanistan as a pilot, and got a deranged, screaming, abusive call from his then wife, or ex-wife, and his children were asking him to come home. And a pilot, a lieutenant colonel, to go home, he had to go to his commanding officer and say, because of the emotional turmoil I'm in, I'm not fit to fly. You need to send me home. And that is pretty much, I know I wasn't there, but I know what the conversation with his commanding officer was like, which is going to be, Joel, are you sure you want to do this? This is effectively the end of your career right here. And Joel was like, yeah, and had to sign. So his career was ruined. At the height of his career, he probably had another, 5-10 years in him. I'm not going to say he could have bucked for general, probably not, but he could have at least made colonel and might have gotten a command somewhere, or might have become a trainer. No, it's over. It was washed out because of this. Right. And but it is what it is. The truth is, especially, and this is a pattern we see in a lot of these cases. We talk about how the system favors women. I think it's important to note that I truly do not believe women as a group are more dishonest, more vicious, more violent, more abusive, blah, blah, blah. It's just that when a whole system is set up to favor psychotic behavior from any group of people, you'll get more of the psychotic behavior. Right. And the ridiculously favoring female prejudice of the entire, not just the family court system, but the criminal justice system, that's going to get you more dysfunctional behavior. And so the cases that you get are almost always going to involve a woman who is batshit bugfuck crazy. And that's kind of why Dr. T was involved. It's clear that every one of the women I've talked about so far, well, I don't know about Judge Jackson, but I mean like Tiffany Marie Smith and Tina Kirk, I think her name was Tina. Yeah. Clearly some kind of borderline or, narcissistic personality disorder, possibly bipolar, clearly mentally unhinged. Right. And the system's just letting them, which in the end doesn't even help those women, right? No. Because they're not getting help for their mental issues that they need. And I don't mean they need to be drugged up or anything like that, but it's like when you enable psychotic behavior, when you encourage psychotic behavior, you not only get more of it, but you, in the end, are not helping the person that you're enabling. It's like giving an alcoholic, well, I know you have a drinking problem, dear. Here's a fifth of vodka. That's what the system does in many cases to these false accuser women, or the women who are abusing the restraining order process or whatever. You're taking the most psychotic and abusive women.
Absolutely. Isn't there something in VAWA that allows attorneys to get the bill paid. Some woman wants a divorce, she can't afford it, so the attorney says something to her like, well, do you anything like, are you afraid of your husband? If you say something like that, we can pay your bill for you. Isn't that,
Yes.
isn't Bob would do something like that as well?
There's all kinds of services that all the woman has to say is that she's in fear and has reason to feel fear, and boom, resources show up.
I bet.
Not just lawyers, counselors, and these lawyers and counselors, because they make their money on this, will absolutely coach them in the non-direct way of saying, well, if are you sure he never took a swing at you? Because if he did, you know that's
Yeah.
leading, that's coaching. They don't have to say go ahead and lie. They
Hmm.
just have to keep at you. Was he ever abusive? Was he mean and yelling when you didn't deserve it? Did he make a fist and kind of gesture towards you? So really, he was about to get violent with you. Do you think he's even madder now, isn't he? Are you sure you're safe? And that's actually predation on the women until we start looking at women as the full-on human beings they are.
Hmm.
We can't address the problems entirely adequately, and they're full-on human beings, which means they're just as capable of violence, of abuse, of dishonesty, of sneakiness.
Hmm.
Yeah, it may express a little different. Women get into fist fights a whole lot less. On
Right.
the other hand, they beat their children more.
Well,
And so that's a rude thing to say, but it's the truth. And so we need to stop pretending any of these are truly gendered issues, except in the sense that, well, they'll tend to express a little different in men and women. But in the bottom line analysis, it's still human beings behaving badly. We're known to do that.
I always say that even though there's the dynamic of the man, the feminists always talk about these power dynamics things. The man is physically stronger than the woman, and he's dominant in all this. Um, what about when a woman is alone with a child and she doesn't have any accountability there? Either he's not around or he's not in the picture at all. What happens then? Then you start finding the core of what she's all about deep down inside. And before, she can play the victim. Oh, I was being beaten up. But what happens when she is alone with that child, like after she leaves him, and then she becomes alone with the child? Have you ever heard of Nina Simone, jazz
Oh, sure,
singer?
the singer. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. There's a
Beautiful, that
document.
beautiful, really deep, kind of alto voice of hers. Yeah.
Awesome, yeah. And there's a documentary about her that's up for an Oscar this year, and I just watched it. And her husband was her manager. He was an ex-cop, and a lot of allegations of abuse, a lot of him beating the living crap out of her. But he
Mhm.
also saved her life because she wanted to join the whole Black Power movement and get guns and say, hey, none of this nonviolent stuff. We got to go take by what it's ours by any means possible. But her husband just said, look, you don't know anything about guns, and I'm not going to teach you. You stick with your music because that's what you know. So she probably would have been dead, a lot sooner if he hadn't done that. But he's still, there was some abuse and so forth, and their marriage wasn't that great. They even had outside partners and so forth. So there's all that. But then later on, she leaves him. She goes to first to Central America, and then she goes to Liberia in Africa.
Mhm.
And for about a year or so, she's doing some traveling, and she takes her daughter with her and leaves the daughter with the family while she just does some traveling. And then she decides to come back, buys a house, and then it's just her and her daughter. Well, then she starts beating on the daughter. And the
Mhm.
daughter is actually a big part of the documentary. And at one point, Lisa Simone, her daughter, says, I think he and her were both nuts. She stayed with him. But it's, the culture, like he says, is always going to focus on that patriarchal side of it, and the man is the dominant one, and look how he is able to use that to his advantage to beat her up. But they never want to talk about what happens when she's alone and away and no eyes of pride on what she can do to the daughter.
That's
Well,
right. And I'll repeat it. The decades of statistics bear it out. Most violent child abuse is committed by women.
Yeah.
And statistically, the one most likely to beat a child is mom, and statistically, the least likely is dad. Step parents are somewhere in the middle. Um, the and this is reality. And then when people say, well, it's understandable because she was abused. And it's like, so she's not responsible for her behavior, but the one who abused her is responsible for his behavior. And what are the odds, by the way, that if he was abusive and violent, that he grew up in a home where he was beaten, quite possibly by his mother?
There's, yeah.
Yeah, which is because, and this goes back to one of my specialty areas, all the work I've done with Aaron Pitsey, all the work I've done with domestic violence researchers. We know the real truth, which is that the majority of people who are abusers were abused as children, typically.
Yeah.
And so, if we're not going to take every abuser seriously, and look at the root cause, which is dysfunction, family dysfunction and personal dysfunction, we can't fix it. It is literally like putting out a fire by pouring water on half of it.